In this nugget, you and I get to take a look at a few ways we can look at CPU utilization using both the vSphere web client and a command line interface utility called ESXtop. And so to do that, we're going to start in the vSphere web client, logged on as administrator at vSphere.local. And what we'll do is we'll launch a few virtual machines, run some CPU intensive applications on them, so that it'll be a little bit more fun to look at and monitor the CPU utilization in both the GUI and the command line tools. So let's do this. With the cluster selected over on the left, let's go ahead and click on VMs, and let's select the row for VM2. Hold down the Shift key, click on VM5 so that VM2 all the way through 5 are selected. And what we can do is migrate them over to ESXi2 as our guinea pig. And as we look at this, I can see that the only one that's not currently on ESXi2 is VM-4. However, because in your lab environment, if you don't have the exact same hosts that are being used to support these VMs, by selecting all of them here, and then right-clicking, and now we have the Actions menu for those 4 machines. If we click on Migrate, and then click on Yes to perform it for all 4, let's go ahead and change the Compute Resource Only, and with that radio button selected, click on Next. And let's make sure that all those VMs are going to be supported by ESXi2 by selecting ESXi2, clicking on Next. We'll leave the networking the same, click on Next, and then we'll click on Finish to go ahead and do that migration. So it should just migrate VM4 over. So it now shows us that VM4 is going to be using ESXi-2 as its host. Now the intention here is we want all these VMs to run on that single host. So what I also want to do for this lab is let's go ahead and disable DRS. Now when we disable DRS, it's not going to like the fact that we have a VApp. In fact, it's going to make us get rid of that before we disable DRS. So as a preemptive move, let's right click on VApp-1. We'll select Delete from Disk. That'll not only delete the VApp, but also the 3 VMs that are in that VApp. So we'll click on Delete from Disk. It's asking us to confirm. We'll go ahead and say yes. And now if we allow the screen to refresh and click on Cluster 1, that VApp is now gone. So now with the cluster selected, if we click on Configure, and with the Configure tab selected, if we go to vSphere DRS, and up in the upper right hand corner, click on Edit. Here we'll go ahead and remove the check from the checkbox for Turn on vSphere DRS. Click on OK. And now it's warning us, hey, if you're going to disable DRS, this also removes all the resource pools in the cluster. However, you can get a snapshot of those if you ever need to restore them later. So let's go ahead and click on Yes to get a snapshot of the resource pools in cluster 1. So we'll do a cluster-1-RP for resource pool. Click on Save. And it deleted the resource pool. It left all the VMs, however. It didn't delete the VMs along with them. And also now DRS is turned off. So with the cluster still selected, let's click on VMs. Let's highlight the row for VM-1, which currently has fault tolerance enabled, and then hold down the Shift key and click on the row for VM-5. That'll select all of them, and we'll go ahead and power them up by using the icon for power on the selected virtual machines right here. So that'll take a few moments to boot up. We also have a notification regarding VM1 if we click on that the state has changed regarding that virtual machine that has fault tolerance enabled. If we also click on the cluster over on the navigator side and click on the Summary tab, it also indicates that we have some changes that are happening regarding high availability and fault tolerance. So we'll go ahead and click on Reset to Green for those messages. We'll give it a few moments for all those VMs to come up. Let's click on Recent Tasks. And our secondary VM is still in the process of coming up. So we'll give that a few moments to finish. And if we minimize Recent Tasks, we could also click on the VMs tab and see the progress here as well regarding these secondary. So it doesn't quite show it as running yet. But when it is, and there's a refresh that happens, it'll have the little indicator next to its icon that it's also running. So while we're waiting for that, if we click on the Summary tab for the cluster, it also indicates there's insufficient configured resources to satisfy the desired vSphere HA failover level on the cluster. So let's fix that while we're here as well. Let's go ahead and click on Configure regarding cluster-1, and then we'll go down to vSphere Availability, and with that selected, we'll click on Edit. We'll go ahead and click on the admission control over here on the left. And currently it's manually set for 10%. So let's remove the check from the checkbox for override calculated failover capacity. And then with a number of 1 of the number of hosts that can fail in our cluster, let's go ahead and click on OK. And let's do a refresh of the vSphere web client. And the little warning message on cluster 1 is no longer there. And so now if we go to the Summary tab, we don't see that warning, and if we click on the VMs tab again, I just want to verify VM 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all running on ESXi2, which indeed they are. So to generate some CPU activity, let's go to VMs 2, 3, 4, and 5 and run an application that'll really require a lot of CPU. So let's open up consoles to VMs 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we can just highlight a VM here, for example VM-2, click on the icon for opening a virtual machine console in a separate window, and then going back to the vSphere web client and repeating that for VMs 3, 4, and 5. And then for each of the virtual machines, let's click on the mouse icon in the upper left-hand corner of their respective desktops. And from the menu, we'll click on Terminal Emulator. And then from here, let's type in GLX Gears and press Enter. And we'll repeat that on the other 3 VMs as well, so that they're all chewing up quite a bit of CPU, all off of ESXi2. Fantastic. So while those 4 VMs are cranking away with GLX Gears, let's go back to the vSphere web client and take a look from the vSphere web client at how we could view some of that information regarding CPU utilization. One place we could go is to the cluster. We can click on Summary at the cluster level, and that's showing us some CPU utilization from the entire perspective of the cluster. We could also click on Monitor regarding the cluster, and then click on the Performance button right here. And then with Overview selected, we could go ahead and select a view here. So for example, if we did the drop down and we selected Hosts, and then we clicked in this CPU usage top 10 graph to activate it, it would show us the CPU usage. And if we wanted to take a closer look at a specific host, we could click on ESXi, for example, 2 over here on the left-hand side. And with ESXi2 selected, we can click on Monitor, and then click on Performance. And then when we select Overview, here we also have graphs regarding CPU and memory utilization and more regarding this specific ESXi host. So for the time range, if we use the drop down and clicked on Real Time, and then clicked in this space for this graph to go ahead and populate it, it's now showing us CPU utilization regarding this host. And if we went to a VM, for example, if we go to VM2 over here in the navigator, and with VM2 selected, if we click on the Monitor tab regarding VM2, and then click on Utilization, this has information here regarding CPU utilization and virtual memory. And if we click on Performance under Monitor regarding this VM, and then click on the graph that we want to see to populate it, also let's go ahead and use the drop down, and for the time range, let's select Real Time. And then once again, we'll click on the graph to bring in that information. And we scroll down just a little bit. It's showing us for this VM its usage as well as ready time. And when we see ready time, you can think of it as the computer or the virtual machine saying, hey, I'm ready to execute a CPU instruction. I'm just waiting for available CPU. So a very high ready time may be an indicator that there's contention regarding CPU on the host. Now we also have a tool that we can use at the command line of an ESXi host, and it's called ESXtop. And to get there, let's go ahead and minimize our vSphere web client. And here on our desktop of our Windows management computer, I've got an icon over here on the left for PuTTY. So we'll go ahead and double click on the PuTTY icon to go ahead and launch PuTTY. And then let's connect to ESXi2 by simply double clicking that on the list, and that'll connect us over to ESXi2. So we'll log on as root, we'll supply our lab password, and press enter. It's indicating that we can disable the ESXi shell. That can be done from the GUI of the vSphere web client, or it can be done right at the DCUI. And most of the time, for security, if we're not needing an active shell at an ESXi host, we'd want to disable the service because it gives us a better security posture, a better defense regarding somebody trying to connect in an unauthorized fashion. So let's go ahead and maximize this PuTTY window. And from here, let's type in ESXtop for the ESXtop command, and we'll press enter. Now, by default, it's updating this screen every 5 seconds. If we want to change that, we can press S on the keyboard and then specify the number of seconds for the delay. So if you want it every 6 seconds or every 15 seconds, put that in, press enter, and that changes the refresh. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the screen just for a moment so I can write on top of it. Here it has the number of VMs currently running and the number of virtual CPUs. So we have 5 VMs that are currently running on ESXi2. Each one of them has a virtual CPU. And then it has a CPU load average. And this is an average for the last 1, 5, and 15 minutes. If we want to filter the output to just VMs, we can just type in a capital V with a Shift V, and that's the View VM Only mode. Now, if you accidentally do a lowercase v like this, which is the storage VM resource utilization screen, we can get back to the CPU information just by pressing the letter C on our keyboard. And ESX Top has built-in help too. So for example, if we type in H on our keyboard, it gives us the help, which indicates here that we could have typed in H or a question mark to get the help text. To get out of ESX Top, we do a Q for quit. If we want to force an update, we can just hit space to force an update instead of waiting for the interval to complete. And then we can modify the fields that we see, change the order of the fields. We can expand the details regarding CPU statistics. And we can also sort based on used, ready, or GID. And GID is an acronym for Group ID. So if we press any key to continue, it does. And it looks like we're missing a VM. We should have VM3 there that's consuming resources. Let's go back to our vSphere web client just for a moment to see what happened to good old VM3. So back at the vSphere web client, oh, here we go. So VM3 has been paused. And that's because of a custom alarm that we created many nuggets ago. So let's right click on VM3 and go down to alarms. And regarding alarms, we'll hover over that. And then from the submenu, we'll say disable alarm actions. And actually, let's do that for VMs 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we'll right click on each of them, hover over alarms, and disable alarm actions. So we did that for VM2, VM3, and we'll do it for VM4 and 5 as well. And we'll also power on VM3 to take him out of his suspended state. So we'll right click on VM-3. From the menu for VM3, we'll hover over power. And from the submenu, we'll select power on. So with VM3 back in the game, let's go ahead and minimize the vSphere web client. We'll go back to our PuTTY session with ESX Top, and there we have VM3. Great, back in the game. And one of our big indicators that we want to look at is the ready, which indicates that the VM had instructions to execute and was ready and waiting for available CPU cycles. And if we have consistently high ready values for our VMs, for example, they're over 15% all the time, that's a good indicator that we might have a CPU shortage on the ESXi host that's supporting those VMs. In this nugget, we've taken a look at multiple options for looking at CPU utilization, both in the graphical user interface of vSphere web client and at the command line using ESX Top. So thanks for joining me in this nugget. Feel free to play around in the hands-on lab, and I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.